Hi, my name is Denicia, and I'm here today with Senator Don Balfour. Senator Balfour served in the Georgia Senate from 1993 until 2014, and he was one of the most powerful men as Rules Chair from 2003 until 2012. Senator Balfour, thank you for being here today.
Nice to meet you. Good to be here.
So, tell me about the day you introduced a bill for GGC.
Well, when I was first elected to the Georgia Senate, it's funny, the first time I ran into Tom Daniels, who's a lobbyist for the whole university system, he'll tell you, first he came up to meet me, and the first thing I said to him is, when are we going to build a 4-year college in Gwinnett County? He said, be patient, be patient. And every time I saw him, I always asked him, when are we going to build a 4-year college in Gwinnett County? So we finally got to the point, and I'll go back a little further. 25 years ago, the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce had a committee. And that committee looked at, do we need a 4-year college in Gwinnett County? And there was decisions, and for instance, there was talk about, should Gwinnett Tech turn into Gwinnett University? You already have something there.
Yeah.
I was part of that committee. Glenn White was chairing that committee at that point. And the decision, after a year-long look at it by the business community and so forth, was to say, no, we need a technical college and we need a university. A few years later, in 1994,
Yes.
the Gwinnett County Board of Commissioners, I'm going to make a mistake by not saying all the names, so I'll make sure I read them. Wayne Hill was the chairman, Judy Waters, Tommy Hughes, Renee Underman, Doug Williamson, saw the future in education that the chamber had brought forth, and they bought this property. Now, they bought this property before the university system of Georgia had decided to build a school here, so they were
Pretty adamant.
sticking their necks out,
Yes.
if you will. The chief financial officer at the time was a young lady named Charlotte Nash, who's now the chairman of the board. So they went out and bought the school with their vision of building a 4-year college here. There were a lot of people, powerful people in Gwinnett County. Again, when they did that in 1994, I had just been elected to the Senate a couple years earlier. The state of Georgia, Gwinnett County was very Republican, but the state of Georgia was still very Democrat. So how do you get a Republican county to get a school when it's a Democrat governor and Democrat House and Democrat Senate and so forth? Well, you had a lot of influential people, powerful people in Gwinnett County, part of the Chamber of Commerce. Jimmy Mason, Wayne Mason, Virgil Williams, John D. Stevens. And again, I'm going to miss somebody, but you know, those type people who are very good friends with Governor Zell Miller.
Yes.
And very good friends with Governor Roy Barnes. And they spent some time talking to them about, hey, this is a great need. Because at the time, and probably still today, of all the counties in Georgia, the most students in the University of Georgia
Yes.
are from Gwinnett County. The most amount of students at Georgia Tech are from Gwinnett County. You go through all the schools, it's
Yep.
still Gwinnett County. The exception would be obviously Kennesaw has the most students from Cobb County because
Yes,
it's right there.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a lot of students from Gwinnett going to school, the need for schools. And so finally, after years, 2005, I was able to introduce the bill that would make a new university in the university system. It was the first time in over 100 years we added a 4-year college.
Wow.
So that was very unique.
Really
I
a
was obviously
landmark.
very honored to be able to be part of that. The funny story that happened in that, I'm presenting the bill, and at the time, by this time, it's a Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, and I'm the Rules Committee chairman, which means
You're the boss.
you don't mess around with me, or you may get buried by Jimmy Hoffa. That's assuming I know where Jimmy Hoffa's buried, but I am from New Jersey, so I
Okay.
may know he's buried.
Nice.
And so I'm presenting the bill, and obviously it's going to pass the Senate. And all of a sudden I heard the lieutenant governor behind me when I got done said, read the amendment, which is the proper procedure if there were amendments, and I'm sitting up there looking out at the 55 people sitting out there in the Senate. Who is amending my bill? Because you don't amend this bill. This is my baby. You don't amend this bill. And one of my friends, a colleague, introduced an amendment the bill itself did not name the school. The university system would name the school. It's just it was a bill that would allow a 4-year college to be put in Gwinnett County. But the amendment said, and it was again a senator friend of mine, that the school should be called Balfour University, and that the mascot would be the green tree frog. Now the reason he put that in there was he had elementary school kids who wanted to have an amphibian for the state of Georgia. There's a state flag, there's a state flower, there's a state tree, there's a state and so he wanted to name the state amphibian, which I always thought was a little kooky.
It's a little off.
Yeah. And you should have heard him from the well speak on, other states have a state amphibian and their amphibians are laughing at us because we don't have an amphibian. So, and the amphibian he wanted, which his grade school kids wanted, was the green tree frog. Okay. So that was his amendment. Obviously they withdrew that after making fun of me for a little bit, but it passed almost unanimously, then went to the House and passed. And that set up the ability to have a system. Still, and we knew where the property was.
Yes.
But we still had no idea, how this was going to work, or, when would it start, and so forth.
Nice. So, I know you know a little about GGC's mission from making. So, do you think GGC has fulfilled its mission?
Fulfilled is a past tense, so I would say they're fulfilling their mission.
Okay.
Could it always be improved? I'm sure Stosh would say yes, and I would say yes too. What's happening here is absolutely amazing. When the dream was dreamed by so many,
yes,
my question was always, there's an old saying, if they build it, will they come? And you wondered, all right, we're going to build this school, but
who's coming?
Is it going to work? Is anybody going to come here? I mean, it's our dream, but is it going to work? And the school started with 118 students the first year. Today, and 10 years later, it was 12,000.
Yes.
In the history of the state of Georgia, in the history of the United States, you've never had a school go from 0 to 12,000 in that short of a time. We're the lowest cost school in the entire university system. Yep. You know that as a student.
I sure do, and I'm forever grateful.
My son had to take summer school this summer at Georgia State to take a class.
Yes.
And he was shocked at how much it cost. It was the same class he could have taken here, but he had to take it in the summertime, and it wasn't offered here that summer. And it's just, other schools cost a lot more. So we're the least expensive. We have a graduation rate that's almost as high as Georgia and Georgia Tech, which are the premier institutions. When you look at the levels of schools that we have, you have Georgia and Georgia Tech, which are premier, and obviously their retention rate's very high. You got Georgia State, Kennesaw, Valdosta universities that it's a little lower retention rate than Georgia Tech, because they'll take more people than Georgia and Georgia Tech will. And then you have access institutions, which Georgia Gwinnett College is one. And access institutions in general have a lower retention rate, obviously, than Valdosta or Georgia State, than obviously Georgia Tech and Georgia. But yet our retention rate here is almost as high. It's literally in the same category as Georgia and Georgia Tech. And so students are graduating. They're able to get an affordable degree. Presidential election last year, you heard a lot about the cost of college education.
Yes.
And across the country, that's a big issue. They ought to just look at Georgia Gwinnett College, because the answer's here.
It sure is. We truly are game changing, in everything. And I think it's really unique too that so many, you said like it's a lot of students from Gwinnett County that are going to college and they're staying here within the community, getting their education and then giving back to the very same community.
Right.
So that's pretty impressive to me.
Absolutely.
So over the years, I know you got money for the school, which is very instrumental in building GGC, but it was during the recession. How did you do that?
As we talk over this 45 minutes, there's so many people that did so many things. I was a part of that, but I was in the right place at the right time. Again, my first 10 years, I was in the minority.
Yes.
I couldn't have talked Zell Miller and Roy Barnes into putting a school here. That's when you needed the Wayne Masons, the Jimmy Masons, the Virgil Williams, the John D. Stevens. When it flipped and all of a sudden Sonny Perdue was governor. Well, Sonny Perdue and I have been good friends for years.
Yeah.
I had worked hard on his campaign when he ran for governor. All of a sudden the Senate was Republican with Eric Johnson as the president pro tem, Tom Price, who's now HHS secretary, but he was majority leader, and then I was rules committee chairman. The three of us would get together on a regular basis and work on issues. And when it came to our point of the budget, I was able to start doing things. Now, some of this is even before Kaufman, before we even had a president, before we had any faculty. I go back to this building here. I put money in for phase one, just an educational classroom building.
Yep.
Is that building C? C,
Yes,
yeah.
building C.
Building C. I put money in the budget. No one asked for it because there was no one here to ask for it. I just figured, they need classrooms.
Yep.
So I put, I don't know, $5-10 million in the budget to help build more classrooms for a school that had no students.
Yep.
The next year I came back and added phase two, which added more classrooms and then the auditorium, which at that point the governor was like, Balfour, how many phases are there to this project? I said, well,
We're still working
you never
to this
know.
day.
You never know. If people knew how many phases there were going to be. So, and by that time, Kaufman was here. In fact, I'll never forget walking through campus with Kaufman, and I would always call him the general because he was a West Point graduate, a brigadier general in the Army, very successful, was then the academic dean for West Point. I mean, you're talking about credentials.
Yes.
And this guy came to be the president of a school that had no teachers, no faculty, no students.
Yep.
And he's got those academic credentials. Like, how did we work that out? And the timing was, he was ready to retire from the military in the West Point, and he kind of was from, I think, Brunswick, Georgia to begin with, so wanted to move back to Georgia. Hey, this is looks like a good opportunity.
Yep.
And he was the right person at the right time. He and Stash and I were walking through the campus because they told him he needed to meet me. And the funny story there, I said, General, I will not get involved with any of what you do. I'll ask questions because I always want to know, why did you do this or why, but I'll never second guess you. Except for one thing.
What was that?
I told them, I said, where the library is behind us now, there are 3 flagpoles.
Yes.
And I said to him, I said, you're a military general, you're a West Point graduate, you know flagology. He goes, yes, sir, I do. I said, those 3 flagpoles are all the same height. And the U.S. flagpole is supposed to be higher.
Yep.
And he turned to Stash and he said, Stash, didn't I tell you to measure that the other day? Yes, sir, you did. And didn't you tell me that the U.S. flagpole is 3 inches taller than the other ones? He goes, yes, sir, they did. It is. At that point, I knew I'd been had. I mean, it sure looked the same height. And when we went to build the library, and I got some money in the budget for that, I said, oh, we can do the flagpoles right now. He goes, well, for another $1 million we can. I said, wait, for another $1 million? Doesn't take $1 million to do it. But he was always looking for some extra money to do stuff. And so we started off with building, the signature building. Before the signature building, Building A was already there. It was being used for night classes for University of Georgia, Georgia State, Perimeter College. A lot of schools were using that as a satellite campus. So when we opened up, we had some classrooms to begin with. The signature building, beautiful building behind it, in front of us here. Did some on Building C, a few phases there. Yeah. And then we got into other things, including the library and the science building. And as the school was growing, the problem we had in the budget was the way universities are funded. We give money based on the student population from 2 years before. Now, if you're the University of Georgia and you went from 30 to 31 to 32, yes, you're going to get money based on 30. But statistically, the difference between 32 and 30 isn't that big of a difference. Yes. Our problem was, well, in the first year it was 115, 118 students, so it didn't matter. But the second year, 750 students, and 750 you would be going against zero. Yes, pretty much. And then the next year went from 750 to 1,500. So it'd be 1,500 versus 118. Well, you got teachers, and then the next year, I mean, it was literally doubling every year. It went from 1,500 to the next year to 3,000. So it would have been 3,000 versus 750. Wow. And you couldn't work. There, yeah. We were growing exponentially, unlike other schools, and so we ended up putting a special line item in the budget to help with that problem, because of the differential growth. We ended up getting close to $20 million a year for a while to help with some of those and other efforts. So those are just some of the things we did. We needed a library to be accredited, so we got that. Then Kaufman came to me with a need for the science building. We need an X amount of, can't get a degree without some science classes, so we needed science labs and so forth. So we first off built an addition, a part of the science building, and then a couple years later came back with the big building. The frustration sometimes would be, he'd ask for 10 things at one time. And really what happened, whether the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, or Kennesaw, or whoever, Georgia State, you get one project every 3 or 4 or 5 years. Yes. And he was getting one a year. But he wanted 10 a year. And I'd be like, prioritize these. No, I need all 10. I mean, he just, but he also was very strategic. And I go back to, you start a brand new school, and some of this we would never have thought of. Let's say we're starting with 4 schools and one of them is education. So you need a dean of education. Yes. So we hire a dean of education. Dean of education decides to hire 2 or 3 teachers. The dean of the other school. So we have 4 deans, we have 12 teachers. We still have 0 students. I mean, how many are going to come? Well, and what do you do when you have that payroll with no students? Well, the thing you could do is start working on accreditation. I didn't know anything about accreditation, but I became an expert at it after a while. Normally, you can't start accreditation. Not normally, you can't start accreditation until you graduate your first students. So what they did was, of the 118 students, they brought in 20 or 30 juniors. I don't know where they got them from, but they had 20 or 30 people that they could bring in who only needed 2 years to graduate. Again, that first year when they had no students, these 10 or 12 faculty members, including the general, including Sas Petresky, the new president now, all worked on accreditation. And I don't even know all that's involved with that, but the books were 6, 8 feet high.
Oh my goodness.
Of all the things, of all the, they needed for accreditation. Well, they had time because they had all these, not that many, but they had a dozen or so professors with no students. So that's what they worked on the first year, as well as planning for the start of the first year. They met with the Accreditation Association, which I believe is right out of Decatur here, a number of times, so they'd understand the process. Yes. So 2 years go by, we graduate our first student, and the next day we hand in all these volumes, applying, why we're applying. Yes. I mean, in fact, the Accreditation Association uses us as an example of an unbelievable way to do it. Yep. We were the fastest accredited school in the history of the United States.
Wow.
In the history of the entire United States. And you know, you put that totally on the General Kaufman, Stas Petresky, his chief of staff, and the faculty they had to begin with. I go to a church in Snellville, Georgia, kind of a big church, and my wife works with high school kids, high school girls. And a number of them came here to school. Most of them came here to school because they couldn't get into Georgia. But after a couple of years, they were going to get their grades up and they were going to transfer to Georgia.
Yep.
None of them transferred to Georgia.
Yep. They
came here, they loved it, and they stayed and they got their degrees here. And I hear that story over and over and over again. It doesn't matter what economic status you come from. You know, and again, you go back to the presidential elections. That was a big issue during the presidential elections. You know, I understand it. I mean, Duke University, Princeton, name the schools. They're $60,000, $70,000 a year. How do you afford that?
Exactly.
Well, you know, if you live in Georgia, if you live in Gwinnett County, and you don't even need the dorms.
Here you are.
you have a very financial way of doing it, and then when you add hope on top of it,
yep.
You know, you can get a degree relatively inexpensive, and compared to some of these schools, unbelievably inexpensive.
Yep.
So,
well, it is safe to say that I believe yourself, Dr. Kaufman, you know, everyone in the start of the school, we're all dreamers, because look at what you have now. Like this large campus that is so beautiful, 12,000 students, all these, you know, degrees and minors,
right.
All these programs to offer. So it is, I think it's a clash of luck, faith, optimism, everything all in one, just saying, hey, we're going to do this and it will be. So for that, I'm very grateful, because I now have an opportunity to get, you know, my bachelor's at a very, well, I'm graduating with no loans. So, you know, like many students here, they're, well, I believe we have the lowest loan rate.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, of students in the state of Georgia. So, you know, that's pretty impressive. But on behalf of every student here, I want to thank you for all the work that you've done for GGC. And we love having you on campus.
I love to be on campus. I love to walk around campus. GGC is better than anyone even dreamed, except for Kaufman, who thought it would be better, because he was always looking for more.
Yes.
There are numerous people I probably didn't mention. That's unfortunate, because there's a lot of people, and you know, the faculty, faculty, one-on-one with students, helping students. This institution isn't about faculty who get published. They're about faculty who graduate students.
Yep.
And they do a fantastic job. My son goes to school here as well, and we're looking forward to his graduation. That, you know, Thomas Jefferson left specific instructions that he wanted left on what he wanted on his tombstone. I mean, he was very specific in many things he did. He had three things written on his tombstone. One was he was the author of the Declaration of Independence.
Yes. Which,
yeah, I get that. I'd be proud of that I mean, he was the author.
Yes.
Wow. A declaration that people around the world look at today as being, you know,
the cornerstone, pretty much.
One of the three things was not he was the President of the United States, which I'm thinking, I think I would put that one on there. But one he had on there was that he was the father of the University of Virginia, because he helped found the University of Virginia. And I understand that. I understand that. I know General Kaufman and what he did. The library's named after him back here,
Yes.
and for good reason. You know, if you could start a school at 0 and grow to 12,000 over 10 years, you probably have had a lot of hiccups, because you couldn't have grown that fast and not had a lot of mistakes. They had very few, very, very few. Most of them were very minor. You know, working with the state, working with the DOT on exit ramps and trying to change some of those things, working on the vision for the future, even some things that, you know, that even haven't come to be yet. There was talk at one point about buying the Walmart property across the street here.
Wow, really?
And there's an underground tunnel that goes under 316 that you could use to connect it to. So for growth and stuff. I mean, again, visions of what you could do. But you look around at what's here, and the only unfortunate thing about us recording today is school's not in session.
It's not. And if it were, you would see the great diversity that there is on this campus.
Right.
And that is the most unique thing about this campus, is you come to school, and you know, most schools, I first attended college in New York, and it was a private school, and it was pretty much everyone from the same caliber.
Sure.
You know, everyone was not from different backgrounds.
Right.
We grew up in this household where it was like, you go to college and that's that.
Right.
And I come to GGC, and it's literally students from everywhere, from Atlanta coming all the way here.
Right,
You know, from all different backgrounds, with the same hope of, you know, enriching this county and making this state better. So
yeah, all over the state. I was here on campus one day and meeting a lot of students from around the world.
that too, yep.
Which I was like, wow, that's interesting. We have the diverse background, which is great. We have the ability of helping to educate students. I earlier talked about the buildings, and it's easy to talk about them because you see them, you can point them out, but you know, it has nothing to do with the brick and mortar. It has to do with educating you and educating other students. And what, you know, those girls that my wife worked with and mentored in high school, and they come here and they get their college degrees and leave with no debt,
Yes.
or very little debt. You know, it goes beyond any dream I could have thought of. So the one thing missing is seeing all the students on campus, because we're at the end of summer school, and we're waiting for the next semester to start in a couple
2
weeks.
weeks, so.
But when that comes back, I mean, that's a reality of what this school does.
Yes.
And I love watching, you know, those chairs underneath the trees over there on hot summer days, but students are there because it's shady and they can sit there and talk and discuss. Or this beautiful library behind us, or the student center and the fabulous food they have there, and bookstore, and the dorms are unique.
Oh, yes.
I never saw anything like that.
Sweet life living, yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
what was dreamed of by the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce, what was dreamed of by the county commissioners at the time, and Charlotte Nash at that point in time as chief financial officer, what was dreamed of by Governor Zell Miller, Roy Barnes, Sonny Perdue, and legislators.
Yes.
The fear of wondering if you build it, will they come, was not a well-founded fear.
It wasn't at all.
You know, doubling in size as a school would grow every year. I mean, 3,000 one year, the next year 6,000. How do you add 3,000 students in 1 year?
Yep.
And then it started slowing down to 7,500 and 9,000 and so forth. Slowed down to a reasonable, manageable rate now. But what they do here from faculty and staff to help the students, to give them a great education at a very good rate,
Yes.
is the best thing the state of Georgia, Gwinnett County, and the Gwinnett Chamber of Commerce ever thought of. So.
And yourself. Thank you.